I want to be very careful with my language tonight because the words we use to describe what happened over Isfahan determine whether we understand it or whether we simply react to it. And I think a great many people are reacting without understanding. 14 aircraft. 14 aircraft that represent the most expensive, most technologically sophisticated, most strategically significant aviation assets in the Western military inventory. Aircraft whose entire strategic rationale, the premise on which the air superiority doctrine of the last 4 decades has been built, rests on a single foundational claim that they cannot be detected and therefore cannot be engaged by any adversary currently fielding surface-to-air missile systems. 14 of them are no longer flyable. 14 of them came down over the industrial heartland of western Iran, over a city that 3 separate American administrations publicly characterized as a target precisely because of the advanced industrial and military infrastructure beneath its skyline. And the surface-to-air missile systems that brought them down are systems that American defense contractors spent the last 20 years insisting were not capable of doing exactly what they just did. I am not being dramatic. I am reading the assessment that was transmitted from U.S. CENTCOM's Intelligence Division to the Joint Chiefs of Staff approximately 4 hours ago, and portions of which have been confirmed to the Intercept by 2 individuals with direct knowledge of its contents. The assessment uses the word unprecedented. It is the correct word. In the next 22 minutes, I am going to walk you through what Iran was flying, because the specific air defense systems matter enormously, what the Western air superiority doctrine actually is, and why it was always more vulnerable than its proponents admitted, what this means for Taiwan, for Eastern Europe, for every theater where the United States has been operating on the assumption that F-35 and F-22 stealth represents an uncounterable advantage, and what happens to the $1. 7 trillion F-35 program when the program's core premise has just been publicly invalidated over Iranian airspace. Subscribe now if you are not already subscribed, because we are going to cover this with the specificity it deserves, and you are not going to get that specificity from outlets that have been selling you the stealth superiority narrative for 20 years and are not yet ready to account for what happened tonight. Let us start with the air defense systems, because this is where the technical details tell the story more clearly than any official statement will. Iran's Integrated Air Defense Network, known as IADS in military terminology, has been the subject of intense Western intelligence assessment for years. The consensus view, reflected in public statements by the U.S. Air Force, in congressional testimony by defense officials, and in the marketing materials of Lockheed Martin, which makes the F-35, has been that Iran's air defense represents a significant but ultimately manageable threat for stealth aircraft. The word manageable has been doing a great deal of work in that sentence, and it has just been retired from service. What Iran has deployed around Isfahan in particular is a layered system consisting of 3 components that, in combination, address the specific vulnerabilities of stealth aircraft in ways that Western threat assessments consistently underweighted. The first layer is the Russian-supplied S-300PMU-2, which Iran operates in a modified configuration that Iranian engineers have spent years adapting to address the system's known limitations against low observable targets. The second layer is the domestically developed Bavar 373, which the IRGC Aerospace Force has described as superior to the S-300 in several respects, and which the Aviation Week and Space Technology Assessment from October 2025 noted had capabilities not fully characterized by Western intelligence. The third layer, and this is the component that almost no mainstream analysis has been willing to engage with, is a passive detection system that Iran has been developing since at least 2015. Passive detection is the technical counter to stealth that the stealth advocates have always been most reluctant to discuss publicly. Stealth aircraft reduce their radar cross-section, the signal they return to active radar systems. But they cannot reduce their thermal signature, their acoustic signature, or the signals emitted by their own systems. A passive detection network does not emit radar, it listens. It detects the thermal wake of a jet engine at altitude. It correlates the electronic signals of the aircraft's own radar altimeter and communication systems. And it can provide, not with the precision of an active radar, but with sufficient precision for cueing an active radar to the target's approximate position, at which point the stealth advantage is substantially reduced. According to Tal Inbar, former head of the Fisher Institute for Air and Space Strategic Studies in Israel, speaking to Jane's Defense Weekly in March 2026, Iran's passive detection investment has been underestimated in Western open-source assessments. That is the polite way to say that the assessments were wrong. Announcement number 1, the 14 aircraft were not detected by the systems the Western doctrine assumed would be the detection threat. They were detected by a passive network that the doctrine largely dismissed. And once detected and cued, the active systems had sufficient engagement window to prosecute them. Let me be even more specific, because the specifics are what make this operationally significant rather than simply tragic. The F-35's stealth profile is optimized against X-band radar, the radar frequency most commonly used by legacy surface-to-air missile systems. The S-300 and its variants use primarily X-band. The Western assumption was that stealth against X-band meant stealth against the most dangerous threat systems. What Iran's passive detection network appears to use for initial cueing is L-band frequency, against which the F-35's radar cross-section reduction is substantially less effective. L-band provides lower angular resolution than X-band. You cannot guide a missile on L-band alone, but you can use it to tell your X-band system where to look. And once the X-band system knows where to look, proximity closes the gap that stealth was supposed to open. This is not a secret. The L-band vulnerability of the F-35 has been publicly documented by aviation analysts, including Carlo Kopp at Air Power Australia, since at least 2013. The Chinese J-20's designers explicitly account for it. Russian Sukhoi engineers explicitly account for it. The question that Western procurement officials have consistently refused to engage with publicly is why the United States spent $7 trillion on a program with a known vulnerability that adversaries have been specifically developing to exploit. The answer to that question is institutional. The services that wanted the F-35 were the same services that controlled the threat assessments that described the F-35 as viable. The contractors that built the F-35 funded the think tanks that produced the strategic analyses validating the F-35's necessity. The feedback loop was closed in a direction that served institutional interests. This is not a conspiracy. It is how large bureaucratic procurement systems work. It is also why 14 aircraft are no longer flyable. Received. That is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2, the strategic consequences of this event extend far beyond Iran. Stay with me here, because this is where the analysis becomes genuinely global in its implications. The United States military's operational planning in the Taiwan Strait, the contingency that consumes more planning cycles in the Pentagon than any other single scenario, is premised substantially on the air superiority that F-35 and F-22 stealth provides. The operational concept, described in unclassified summary in the 2025 National Defense Strategy, assumes that U.S. air assets can penetrate Chinese integrated air defense networks with acceptable attrition rates and establish the aerial dominance necessary for follow-on operations. That assumption has just been empirically tested in a theater with air defense systems that are, in several technical respects, less sophisticated than China's current generation. China's HQ-9B and its successor systems use a multi-band detection architecture. China has invested more heavily in passive detection than any other nation. The People's Liberation Army Air Defense Force has been studying the F-35's detection profile for 15 years. If Iran's integrated system, assembled from Russian components, domestically engineered modifications, and passive detection technology, can successfully engage 14 stealth aircraft over Isfahan, the question every responsible defense analyst in Washington is asking tonight is, what does the math look like over the Taiwan Strait against a system that is categorically more advanced? The answer to that question fundamentally changes the risk calculus of any Taiwan contingency, and changing that risk calculus is worth more to China strategically than anything else that could have happened over Isfahan tonight. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute's 2025 military spending analysis, China has invested approximately $340 billion in anti-access and area denial systems over the past decade. Those investments were made on the explicit theoretical premise that advanced air defense can negate Western air superiority. Isfahan just provided the empirical validation of that theoretical premise. You cannot put a dollar value on that validation, but you can note that it arrived at a cost of 0 Chinese assets and produces strategic dividends that will compound for years. Announcement number 3. What happened over Isfahan tonight will be remembered as the moment the air power doctrine that has structured Western military strategy since the Gulf War became publicly and undeniably contested. Since 1991, Western military strategy has rested on a foundational assumption that Western air power, properly employed, can hold any adversary at risk while remaining itself effectively invulnerable. Operation Desert Storm, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Libya. In every conflict where Western air power operated against a significant adversary, the outcome validated the doctrine. The adversary could not touch the aircraft. The aircraft could touch the adversary. The doctrine was never seriously challenged in the field, and therefore the doctrine calcified. It became not a tested hypothesis but an article of faith. Articles of faith are dangerous in strategic planning because they resist the kind of adversarial red teaming that would identify their vulnerabilities. Nobody inside the system is incentivized to seriously argue that the F-35 program's foundational premise might be wrong. The careers, the contracts, the institutional prestige of too many actors depend on the premise being right. So the premise is never seriously challenged from within. And when it is challenged from outside, from adversaries who have no institutional interest in the premise being correct, the challenge arrives not as a theoretical paper, but as 14 aircraft that are no longer flyable. Now let us talk about what the mainstream narrative is missing because the framing matters. The narrative being offered is one of Iranian recklessness, of an act of war against advanced Western assets that will produce severe consequences. That narrative serves a purpose. It positions the United States and its partners as the aggrieved parties responding to unprovoked aggression. It allows the focus to remain on Iran's behavior rather than on the defense procurement decisions that produced 14 aircraft with an exploitable vulnerability. The question that nobody in Washington wants to ask publicly tonight is, who is responsible for the $7 trillion program that just had its foundational premise tested and found wanting? Not who fired the missiles. Who certified the aircraft's survivability against the threat environment? Who signed the operational risk assessments? Who approved the mission parameters? And if the vulnerability was known, as the L-band documentation suggests it was, who decided not to address it? This is the accountability conversation that the institutional response will work very hard to prevent. Because the answer to those questions does not lead to Iran. It leads to offices in the Pentagon and to boardrooms in Fort Worth, Texas. This pattern is as old as military history. Consider Thermopylae, not the famous battle, but its strategic aftermath. After Xerxes' massive Persian army took the pass at significant cost and proceeded to sack Athens, Greek city-states that had been hedging their commitments reconsidered. The Persian Empire had demonstrated that it could overwhelm any defensive position given sufficient resources. But the cost at Thermopylae had revealed something the Persian commanders did not want to acknowledge, that a numerically smaller force fighting in the right terrain with the right tactical intelligence could force a disproportionate cost on a supposedly invulnerable juggernaut. The Greek alliance that formed after Thermopylae was built on the knowledge that Persia was not invincible. That knowledge changed everything that followed. Tonight, Isfahan is Thermopylae, not because Iran has defeated the United States. It has not, but because it has demonstrated that the supposedly invincible technological advantage is not invincible. And every actor that has been hedging its strategic commitments based on the assumption of American air dominance is now reconsidering. 3 paths from here. Path 1. The United States absorbs the tactical loss, conducts a comprehensive review of F-35 vulnerability against multi-band passive detection architectures, quietly modifies operational doctrine, and does not publicly acknowledge the scale of the doctrinal revision. The war continues. Iran and its partners do not exploit the doctrinal shift to the full extent they could, because doing so would accelerate the U.S. revision. A tacit equilibrium emerges. This path is what institutional actors in Washington will prefer. Path 2. Domestic political pressure following the loss of 14 aircraft and the service members who flew them forces a congressional investigation into the vulnerability and the procurement decisions that produced it. The investigation reveals the degree to which threat assessments were managed. The F-35 program faces serious scrutiny. Defense industry relationships with strategic planning are publicly examined. This path is unlikely in the near term because it requires political courage that the current environment does not produce. But it is the path that would actually address the structural problem. Path 3, the path that adversaries are planning for. China, Russia, and Iran each independently recognize that the Isfahan event has created a demonstration effect that will recalibrate the risk calculations of non-aligned states, of partners who have been uncertain about U.S. security guarantees, and of adversaries who have been deterred by the air superiority narrative. Each of them accelerates the program specifically designed to exploit the demonstrated vulnerability. The window between the Isfahan demonstration and a U.S. doctrinal response is used as a period of maximum strategic maneuver. This path requires no coordination between these actors. It requires only that each of them respond rationally to the information the Isfahan event provided. I think we are in path 3, not because any actor has decided it, because the logic of the situation produces it regardless of what anyone decides. Tell me in the comments what you think the F-35 program's future looks like after tonight. Tell me whether you think the L-band vulnerability was known and suppressed or genuinely underestimated. And tell me what you think the Taiwan Strait risk assessment looks like in the classified briefings that are happening in Washington right now. We are tracking every development. Subscribe now, share this analysis, turn on notifications. The next update will come when the operational picture clarifies further. We will see you in the next one.